Good evening, everyone. My name is Alia Yunus, and I teach in Film and Heritage Studies here at NYU. And I am very happy to welcome you to this NYU Institute talk that is part of the 50U series. Today, we're very delighted to have with us Maryam Ahli from Dubai to talk to us about the perspective on Dubai architecture. I'm going to formally read her bio so I make sure I say everything. An Emirati architect and architectural historian passionate about architecture, art, design, research, and history. Maryam has a Bachelor of Architecture from the American University in Sharjah and a Master's in Archaeological History from Architectural History, from the Bartlett School of Architecture at UCL in London. Academically, she has conducted extensive research and is published on the topic of modernism and modern heritage in Dubai. Maryam aims to cohesively bring together the professional and academic knowledge to curate, conceptualize, and execute projects that create a balance between the modern and the traditional, both in theory and in practice. After Maryam's talk, we'll have time for questions from the audience. And with that, welcome to the podium, Maryam.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today I will be talking about the arrival of late modernism in Dubai through a selection of case studies and ongoing research of mine. But first, I'd like to thank NYU Abu Dhabi and also the 50U book series for this opportunity. This is a brief on what we'll be discussing today. It will have a general overview of modernism as a movement and then how Dubai came to become modern. And then we'll talk about Dubai's modern architectural planning and look at different case studies. The aim of this research is to study modern buildings that emerged in Dubai in the 60s and 70s. This allows for a better understanding of how modernist architectural manifestations evolved in that shifting period and the ways in which they helped shape the urban fabric of the Emirate. The study is done in light of Sheikh Rashid's vision to raise the standards of living in Dubai to become an international city. Also important in this analysis are the master plans of Dubai developed by John Harris that mark a turning point for the city's growth. This research documents these examples of modernism in hopes that they become enlisted and preserved as part of our modern heritage, not only in Dubai but the wider Emirates. To understand modernism in the context of today's talk, we need to know how it emerged and what were the principles of the international modernism movement when it came to architecture. Modernism as a global architectural and design movement emerged in the first decades of the 20th century as a response to accelerated industrialization and social changes. The rise of modernism in architecture happened between the 1920s and 1950s, but its origins go back actually to the Enlightenment period and expansions to high-tech following the Industrial Revolution. Thus, its history can be divided into three periods: early, modern, and late in which most of the famous architectural mottos were coined, less is more, for example. Modernism emphasized function, simplicity, and rationality and created new forms of expression with a new aesthetic in design. This new aesthetic resulted in modern buildings that were considered appropriate for all nations and cultures. In this pursuit of modernists for order and universals in architecture, modernism utilized new materials and advanced technology and rejected old, traditional, historical ideas and styles, in specific, rejecting ornamentation completely and instead embracing minimalism. Modernism as a stylistic movement also encompasses principles from other movements such as Futurism, Constructivism, D-Style, and the Bauhaus. These here are the principles for the practice of international modernism. Amongst the leaders of this movement are the architects celebrated until today, such as Le Corbusier, Walter Gropius, Philip Johnson, Mies van der Rohe, and of course Louis Sullivan, who coined one of the most famous mottos of the modernist movement, form follows function, a practice that is still existent today in academia as well as in real life. Adolf Loos had an impact on modernism too. His essay, published in 1908, created the slogan, "Ornament is a crime." With crime, Loos meant the waste of money, labor, and materials, thus the economics of building. For him, as modern man appreciated simplicity, ornament had no meaning, no place, no value within modern society. This established a lack or absence of ornamentation in modern buildings of that time, as well as in certain examples of contemporary and postmodern architecture. I want to start this chapter with a quote that actually jump-started my research into modern heritage. Architecture is a subject which demands to be understood in context, that is, within the context of its production, society, economics, politics, and culture, and the context of its consumption, representation, and interpretation. Dubai is considered historically very young in comparison with Euro-American cities, despite its long-standing importance for centuries as a trading port for commercial routes and also political administration between Britain and the sub-Indian continent. The city's significant efforts in being recognized as an economical center and a touristic destination was in the making way before it became recognized today as a global city only built purely post-oil. Before the 1960s, life and settlement in Dubai mainly existed around the creek, which divides the city life and activity geographically, economically, socially, culturally, and even visually into two complementary parts. The late 1950s witnessed movements from the residential mud brick, coral stone, and barasti palm frond houses to modernist housing districts distant from the creek, which resulted in associated changes in demographics, land use, and buildings, along with zoning regulations across the city. These events taking place from the late 1950s onwards are now considered as foresight to the future growth of Dubai. That becomes evident in the early establishment of foreign and national banks that coincided with the expanding plan of the city and as well took advantage of the potential of profit-making from loans and investments at the time. These developments paved the way for Dubai to flourish across its urban fabric, allowing for modernist aesthetics to finally enter the architectural scene, radically transforming building typologies, materials, techniques, and styles over the next 3 decades. Modernism stylistic aesthetics and design principles were introduced in Dubai in the late 1950s and early 1960s, where it was adapted to local practices and social values. These new buildings, in the context of old Dubai at the time, succeeded in integrating their modernist approach to design with vernacular building traditions. For instance, most of these buildings contained courtyards usually made out of sand. They had abstracted ornaments in the form of lattice work for screens, windows, and shades, elements of passive cooling, recessed windows, and a respectful play on the dichotomy of public, private, and gender-specific spaces. Such architectural manifestations took into consideration a detail-oriented methodology in their built environment, structural specifications, material selections, and evolving typologies. Most importantly, they were sensitive to the context of the urban fabric in which they were situated in, as well as the needs of their end users. What they tried to do is they attempted to reconcile local specificities of customs and materials with the colonial innovations of the time. Manifestations that had the ambition of belonging to an international movement, yet was responding to context. As was the case with their traditional and historical predecessors, the wind tower houses, these modernist buildings were also conscious in their overall design propositions. To understand architecture in Dubai in relation to the international modern movement, reflections on the context are then essential. Why was modernism introduced in Dubai and how was it applied to its architecture? In search of the why, we can look at two influential forces, a foreign presence and a local effort attempting to reconcile with the impacts and influences of the outsider. The former was a colonial imposition of sorts in Dubai with heavy presence of British forces, which in turn played a role in the introduction of modernity and its principles to the city. Their ambitions were translated through an imposed project of modernization at both the urban and architectural style. On the local front, however, that was the foresight of the late ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed Al Maktoum, who understood the significance of built forms and their capability to be seen as social acts, to be seen as agents of change and future foresight. The how will be demonstrated later in the case studies that I will take you through. Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum, the late ruler and father of modernity in Dubai, was commonly known in Arabic as Bani Dubai al Haditha, the builder of the modern Dubai. Surrounded himself with British, European, and local advisors who supported his futuristic outlook and ambitious projects. In the mid-1900s, with British assistance and Sheikh Rashid's vision, Dubai was established as a trading center regionally and globally. The late arrival of modernism in Dubai was influenced by this desire for modernity, thus adapting the principles of this international style. This prompted Sheikh Rashid to invest in advisors and architects who could carry out this modern agenda, while having in mind the best interest of the emirate in terms of its growth, its development, and in its heart, its citizens. The almost drastic stylistic evolution of Dubai from this areesh, coral stone, and palm front houses to these clean-cut, whitewashed modernist buildings allows us to better understand this polar shift from tradition to modernity, not only as a mode of living, not only as a mode of building, but also as a way of living. Sheikh Rashid was responsible for the transformation of Dubai from a small cluster of settlements near the Dubai Creek to a modern port city and commercial hub. In this picture here, you can see Sheikh Rashid with Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid in the Empire State Building in New York. And this was when he saw the World Trade Center in New York being constructed, and he came back to Dubai and he said, let's do one for Dubai. And that's how the one in Dubai happened. Under his direction, all of the following projects took place. The Dubai airport opened in 1959. The city was electrified in 1961. The municipal council was officially formed. Hence, town planning regulations were employed. A freshwater distribution plant was commissioned. Al Maktoum Bridge opened to traffic in 1963. The iconic clock tower was erected in 1967. Foreign international brands and products were imported and sold. Infrastructure, libraries, service stations, recreational facilities, schools, hospitals, roads, and a modern telecommunication network were built. The creek was also dredged to allow for larger vessels to enter, which enhanced Dubai's role as a trade harbor. Container ports were constructed, and oil was found in 1966, and eventually Emirates Airlines was launched in 1985. These projects showed clearly that Dubai's infrastructure planning wasn't just a response to immediate needs of the community. It was clearly linked to the ambitious ideas about the future development of the city for generations to come. John Harris, a British architect and planner, completed the first town plan of Dubai in 1960 based only on aerial surveys and existing settlements. His proposed network of roads, zoning, and infrastructure were extended out to the vast empty deserts of the city, hence guiding the early development of Dubai prior to the 1966 discovery of oil. An updated version of the plan was later published in 1971, taking into consideration certain changes in zoning requirements. These master plans mark a turning point in the architectural language and urban design of the city, where traditional practices become altered and at times completely abandoned, and the influence of late modernism starts manifesting itself in the newly constructed buildings, landmarks, parks, and neighborhoods, most of which were designed by Japanese, British, European, and some Arab architects, some of whom include Sir William Halcrow, John Harris, Peter Jackson, Otto Bollard, Zaki Hamsi, Jafar Touqan, and Edgar Bublik. This plan guided Dubai's modest early development until the discovery of oil in 1966. It demonstrates why Sheikh Rashid chose to hire a young and largely unknown architect instead of an actual established town planner. John's plan accepted the logic and economies of the existing settlement around the creek and proposed a road system that weaved the old town into Dubai's future growth. He did not try to impose preconceived ideas of urban forms on the city or erase the old city. What he did was he actually walked down every track in the old town to start extending these lines out to the city. When oil was found in August of 1966, he actually witnessed the presentation of a jam jar full of oil to Sheikh Rashid. Sheikh Rashid, when he saw this oil, told John Harris, "Let's progress with our plans for Dubai. Let's build Rashid Hospital and other modern schools and banks and commercial buildings." Now we go to the how of this international modern style was applied to Dubai's architecture through an exploration of some architectural manifestations and then through some urban monuments and landmarks. Old and New Dubai represent the city's dual cosmopolitan context, each with its own set of connotations. The prefix new usually means successor to or inferior of a no longer existent entity. However, in the case of Dubai, it implies that new and old coexist synchronically. It's an idiom of sibling competition rather than that of inheritance. This old-new Dubai spatial matrix is essential to understand how the architecture of these case studies, being mostly non-iconic buildings, responds to sociocultural, political, and economic factors that allowed for the principles of modernism to be expressed through them. Starting with the discovery of oil and the economic wealth generated by its sale, the implementation of the first master plan of the city, the economic boom during the 1970s following the dramatic increase in oil prices, architecture reflected all these layers of rapid change in the city. In regards to how modernism was applied to the context of Dubai, we look at it, but also as we look at its perception as an outsider product at that time. I selected a series of public use buildings that vary in type, kind, and typologies. My research today, I'll show you a sample of what I've been looking at, but I looked at educational facilities, governmental healthcare services, public service buildings, recreational facilities, sometimes religious buildings, or commercial ones. When I came to select the case studies, I had to identify certain criteria for my selection. So I had to look at, there's a vast offering of modernist buildings in Dubai. So how do we choose which ones to preserve, which ones to document? How do we make that selection? And that was a struggle, and it's a struggle I continue with today, because if it's up to me, I want to preserve it all. I decided to focus on buildings that were the works of famous influential architects, buildings that had a social, cultural, or political impact, such as schools, hospitals on the urban fabric of the city, buildings that were the first of their kind, the first hospital, the first hotel, the first bank, buildings that are significant in shaping the urban fabric of the city. There are buildings that aesthetically are not significant, but the way they were built in certain parts of Dubai allowed for urban development around them, and that's why they became important. Buildings that had important aesthetic features that adhere to modernist principles. Buildings that also became initial prototypes for mass production. You can see this a lot in clinics. They usually were mass produced after an initial prototype. You can see it in public or governmental schools for boys and girls. They were prototypes that were also mass produced. And buildings that are still functional today as they were originally intended for, and buildings that are considered iconic, some of which are still featured on our banknotes. This building I stumbled across in Deira when I was just doing some documentation. It's a beautiful building amongst a seascape of very, very ugly towers in the district. It has the plaque underneath that says 1961 as an attribute to the year it was built, but it's a beautiful example of a modern building in Dubai where there is actually a lack of ornamentation compared to other buildings, but it still adheres to the international principles of having whitewashed buildings, horizontal volumes with a vertical complementary one. This is a bit better picture of the building in context. The Dubai Zoo of 1967, this was designed by Otto Bollard. Otto Bollard was an Austrian architect who used to practice in the city. He had a habit of collecting wildlife animals. So Sheikh Rashid and a lot of people started complaining that he has lions at home and he has elephants and this is not normal. So Sheikh Rashid decided to give him a piece of land at the end of the city, tell him, you know what, just go put your animals there, build a zoo, make it a public attraction, let everyone come to it. The funny thing today is that land is Jumeirah 1. It's the beginning of Dubai. It no longer is at the end of town. This building had sadly closed down in 2017. All the animals have been shifted to the safari, but the building itself is a beautiful one that I think could be repurposed for other uses in the future. This is a part of the residential quarters of the zoo. The Union House of 1970, this is now actually part of the Ittihad Museum experience. What a lot of people don't know about this building is it was built for Sheikh Rashid as an administrative building for him to receive guests and have meetings, but it also happened to witness the formation of the UAE. This is where the UAE declaration was signed. This is where the union happened on December 2nd, 1972. And this circular building became the perfect example or perfect tribute to the Union of the Emirates. This expansion of the airport happened in 1971. It was a design that was considered ahead of its time. It avoided any traditional decorative motifs. Instead, it employed a visually open and vaulted structure to create an arabesque quality. These umbrella units of glass-reinforced plastic also formed the roof, and access was elevated by a roadway via a flyover from the main road, something that was the UAE's first at the time in 1971. The Zabil School for Girls is a public school that was a high school for girls. It was built in the mid-70s by Khatib and Alami. It closed down in 2012. I have to go on a personal tangent here. In 2012, I actually wrote an article to preserve this building from being demolished because it was set to be demolished. That's why it was evacuated in 2010. And then in 2014 and 15, it became a subject of my master's study and became one of my case studies. And for 10 years, nothing happened to the building. It was not demolished. We had so many efforts to preserve it. And in 2020, I joined Dubai Culture as a projects manager. And 1 month after I joined, it actually was shifted over to Dubai Culture as an asset. And today I'm actually working on the rehabilitation of the building. So to me, I feel this is a personal victory. The building is very significant in its design because it's designed in a U shape that kind of allows women a freedom to do all the things they want to do within the structure. If they want to remove their covers, play sports, do theater, do everything. It was very sensitive to the needs of the community at the time. It also geographically has a wonderful location between the old and new Dubai. The World Trade Center of 1979 that we earlier talked about is designed by John Harris and it was inaugurated by Queen Elizabeth in 1979. It became one of Sheikh Rashid's last tributes to his state. And at the time it was built at 40 stories high. It was actually for 20 years the tallest skyscraper in the Arabian Peninsula. This is a nice picture I always like to show because it shows you the skyscrapers of modern Dubai rather than the Dubai of now. In 1980, Sheikh Rashid also in the picture above, he's actually on the construction site for the Hayat Regency Hotel that was designed by Gary Whitney of 3D International for his client Abdul Wahab Galadari. It is the first Hayat hotel in the UAE. It had 421 rooms and 388 apartments, but the coolest feature it had was one of the first ice skating rinks in the Emirate. Al Mulla Plaza of 1980 was designed by Pacific Consultants, a Japanese consulting firm that was based in the UAE and designed a lot of the projects at the time. It's still in use today as a mall, and it's considered actually one of the first malls in Dubai. It also includes a residential block that has 2 and 3 bedroom split level flats and an upper shaded tennis court totaling an area of 53,000 square feet. What's interesting about this is if anyone's been to the Dubai municipality building in Dubai, they have the similar shading structure that shades the tennis court. It's a similar structure because it was designed also by Pacific Consultants. This project sadly was demolished in 2017. It's Al Amal Hospital, designed by John Harris in 1983. This hospital was one of many that John Harris designed. John Harris designed the Dubai Hospital, the Rashid Hospital, but what was very important about this was the first hospital that was dedicated to mental health in the Emirate. And it was called Al Amal, which is Arabic for hope. This building, the hospital still exists, Al Amal Hospital still exists in Dubai, but the building is sadly demolished. It is, I think now will be part of the City Walk development. But what was very smart, what was very sensitive in its approach is the building was designed around these sand-filled courtyards, and it had all its windows facing the courtyard. So it created a sense of home. It was designed based on how the traditional home was built. In a traditional home, the windows don't look at the outside because of privacy. So what happens is you have a very open courtyard in the middle. The windows are looking inside, and the courtyard becomes your interiorized public space. So this is the same kind of feeling that he brought to his patients for them to feel at home, and it stayed 1 story high. It never went higher than that. So there was a lot of sensitivity in that design, considering who it was supposed to cater for. This is a picture from an event we did to say goodbye to the school. We actually brought a lot of patients back to the school to say goodbye, and we gave them balloons that they wrote messages in and they let go of. And there is a very nice message I'll show you at the end of the presentation. These are just a little bit of images of different architectural examples of modern architecture in Dubai. A few of which until today exist, a few that sadly no longer are there, like Al Nasr Cinema or the housing compound next to the British Petroleum Building. These actually are demolished. There are some sketches that were designed but never actually conceived. And there are things that exist today, like the Sheraton Hotel at the bottom. I also decided to put together an example of some of the urban landmarks that shaped the city at the time. These urban landmarks were very important as well because they became these visual identifiers for a lot of generations that did, or maybe pre-Google Maps, that generation. So that's how people used to use them to also explain how you can go to or reach a destination. So they became very important. I had to also go through the same criteria of selection, but with urban landmarks, I had to go beyond the landmark and look at urban neighborhoods as a whole. How do we preserve that? How do we preserve the sense, the feel, the ambiance of such a neighborhood? We also had to look at what kind of social, cultural, political, and educational value these landmarks and neighborhoods brought. Were they the first of their kind? Is it the first park? Is it the first roundabout that had a certain sculpture commissioned on it? Is it still functional as it was originally intended for? Are they significant in terms of their geography? Are they site-sensitive? Are they site-specific? Are they also prototypes for mass production? Because in the 70s and 80s, with the increase in labor and the increase in jobs, we started to see a lot around Deira and Jumeirah. A lot of housing compounds started to come. So the housing compound itself, maybe aesthetically and architecturally, is not that important, but as an urban intervention on site, it is important to look at that and what kind of development happened around that, not just architecturally, but also socially, culturally, politically, and economically. I also looked at public squares in Dubai, a lot of which no longer exist. They've been replaced by highways, but their existence at a time also had a social communal value that today we're missing. This is the clock tower of Dubai. It dates back to, for its construction to 1964 to 1965, and it was completed in 1967. So Otto Bollaert, the same architect who designed the zoo, actually designed the structure for this roundabout, the structure to hold the watch. The watch was actually a gift from Sheikh Rashid's son-in-law. When he married his daughter, he gave it to him as a gift, so they used the watch to create this monument. And the structural engineering part of the watchtower was designed by Zeki Hamsi, who finished all the calculations and did something very new at the time with reinforced concrete, considering the arches and how they were designed and put together. This is one of the best examples of urban monuments in Dubai because it still exists until today. It's still functional and it's still very much a landmark within the city. Al Safa Park, 1975. I really struggled to find an image of Al Safa Park before it changed because a lot of it was removed sadly when they did the Dubai Canal project, so it's become 1/3 of what it used to be. But this is one of the original images of the park. It was a 64-hectare urban park located in Dubai. It was a destination for residents for years and years. It went under redevelopment in 1984 onwards, and the park contained 3 lakes, over 200 species of birds, and 16,924 different trees and bushes. Today, it's still in use, but a huge part has sadly been demolished, but it still is a very important urban landmark, and you still see a lot of the local community walking around it. There's still a track around it. It's still important to the fabric of the city. This is Al Khazan Water Tower and Park from 1983. It's an urban monument, and it serves as a landmark to an urban monument that was the water towers of the 1960s to the 1980s that actually held fresh water. It's still in use today, and it is 40 meters high, which makes it a very nice. It gives it a very nice height and contrast as it's located opposite to City Walk. And in front of the blue and white water tower is a large grass-covered wall with the phrase "The Road to Happiness" etched on it. And I think the road to happiness is somewhere in the 70s and 80s for me. This is an example of a few urban districts that I actually looked at when I did my study. Again, my research is ongoing. I'm still every day there are examples of these buildings, these urban districts that are brought to my attention, and usually they're brought to my attention because sadly they're about to be demolished. So there's been a lot of effort to document as much as I can, but I think there's also been collective effort UAE-wide to preserve modern heritage, and I think the awareness that this has brought to the people is very important. This is the picture that I always like to end with. It's a quote from a patient from Al Amal Hospital who said in Arabic, "Dom fi amal fi mustashfa al-amal." There's always hope in Al Amal Hospital. And I felt that this really rang true to my research. There's always hope. There's always hope to preserve, to document, to raise awareness, and to make this public knowledge, to make this a public responsibility as well. Dubai's architectural growth did not pause in the 1940s wind tower houses and palm frond huts. It continues to survive in the memories of these modernist structures. The international standards of modernism do not completely apply to the context of modernist structures in Dubai because the fundamental practice of international style dictates that it is void of contextual responses in its design approach, and it should lack ornamentation. However, as the case studies you saw, this does not apply to Dubai. The Dubai modernist structures responded to the local context, and they incorporated stylistic, although simplified forms of elements to adorn the buildings, making these interventions more site-aware, sensitive, and specific. This is why I've come to the conclusion that although modernism as a stylistic movement arrived to Dubai late, it adapted itself to become more of a regional response rather than an international one. It was expressing local culture and values through modern design, a style that responded to Dubai's need to become a modern city, and it also respected this transitional period from traditional to modern in built form. It became almost a hybrid of several styles. Studying the arrival of late modernism and post-oil Dubai through examples of public and private use buildings reveal early tendencies for eclectic design. We see sometimes a little bit of everything in them. And that, I think, is an outcome probably due to the initial struggle of modernist architecture and finding a language completely harmonious with the local context and its stylistic inclinations. They had a lot of sand and they had to adapt to that. They had to adapt their designs to them. So, yes, these are modern heritage, but these are regional modern heritage. These are modern heritage that respond to the context. These are modern heritage that are site specific. There is an utmost need for preserving, classifying, and documenting modern heritage in Dubai. Today, many of these buildings, landmarks, parks, neighborhoods, and districts are at risk and are somewhat of a bad condition and or are being demolished or have already been demolished. It is important to raise awareness and realize the urgent need to conserve these structures, for they are essential in understanding the architectural evolution and urban growth of Dubai as a multicultural metropolis. These buildings also have a contribution to us that goes beyond the built environment. There is a generational gap that these buildings bridge. A lot of our parents, a lot of our grandparents witnessed the buildings or lived in the buildings of the 1940s and the Wind Tower buildings, but we didn't. And then a lot of today's generation knows all this shiny glass and steel architecture and doesn't know these buildings. But then these buildings kind of bridge that gap generationally because it's buildings that the older generation contributed to, whether it was through investment or towards design, or they commissioned them, or they worked as contractors on them. It was our generation who went to school in these buildings, who went ice skating, who watched a movie in these buildings, and then there is the current generation who passes by them and still uses them as urban identifiers in their journey across the city. These buildings are very important because they help narrate the story of Dubai, but not just visually. It's a story that is based on memories. It's place-based memories that tell the story of Dubai. A lot of these buildings are gone. A lot of this comes back also to almost the nomadic nature of this region, of building, shifting, moving around. This movement is still very much part of our culture. So through these place-based memories, we can tell the story of Dubai through generations and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Maryam, for that talk. It was really enlightening. So many things we've driven by and never really stopped to think about. We have plenty of time for questions from the audience, and we have a mic that's going around. Oh, no, it's over there on both sides. If anyone would like to ask a question, they can just go over to the mic and ask. While you're all formulating your questions, I thought I would ask Maryam, the building, the Zabil school that you helped save, you said it's being redone and repurposed. For what is it being repurposed?
So we're working on it with other governmental entities. Currently, we're doing a full rehabilitation of the structure, so it's rehabilitated for future purposes. But the idea is to turn it into a cultural asset in addition to the cultural scene in Dubai. I can't reveal more details of the project, but it will be launched soon.
Okay, yeah. Exciting. Do we have any questions? Yes. I think you're close enough that they can. Let me.
Dubai is lacking dramatically of public space. Architects and planners intend to do something about it. And how does the local population react to that? Is it a problem? What do they do? If you can't meet anymore, your social life is but you don't have the leisure to go outside. You're always inside, and you were people actually used to live outside. So I'm interested in hearing from you. Sorry. Okay. So I would be interested to hear from you whether there are any plans to change that.
I think I'll speak on behalf of myself. So as an architect, I think very early on, I made an ethical decision on my behalf. I feel like I don't need to contribute to the evolving scene of these new shining glass architecture that are not site sensitive, they're not site specific, they don't respond to the need of the local population. They could be plugged in any city around the world and it wouldn't make a difference. So instead, I felt I have, as well as an Emirati, this ethical responsibility to look at what exists in terms of heritage and to redefine what is heritage, because up to 2-3 years ago, the discussion on heritage in the Emirates was very much confined to the Wind Tower buildings and these Barasti Palm Frond Areesh buildings. And this is not really where heritage stopped. Heritage continued to happen because as long as memories are being created in places, that's also part of our heritage, that's part of our story. So in my practice, I always come back to these buildings, and I'm a very firm believer in readaptive use. Yes, the building might have served its purpose at the time, but why not introduce a new purpose? Why not allow for life to continue to happen in these places where life once actually took place? And I think we do that a lot in the kind of projects I work on in terms of museums. We rehabilitate a lot of old spaces, but I also have a personal dilemma with that because a lot of people think if you are to preserve a place, you have to turn it into a museum, but that's not true. You don't need to turn a place into a museum to preserve it. You can just repurpose it, reuse it, introduce different kinds of life into it. And I think that something very important is a lot of people, I think, just discard this and they call it old and they say, oh, this architecture failed, it's no longer successful. But I actually think it's the people who failed the architecture, not the other way around. I hope that answered you.
Is the voice clear? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So first of all, thank you. It was a great presentation. I'm Bushra Hassan, architect and PhD student in AEU. And my research intention is also into urban planning and cultural heritage, studying the modern heritage also in Al Ain City, specifically Sha'biyat. So I have many questions. I hope I can talk to you later also. My first question is, did you study Sha'bi houses in Dubai, for example, in Jumeirah and those areas, the very beginning housing style, let's say, or the modern housing? Also, we are studying those buildings from our own effort. What are the policies, the current policies from, let's say, Dubai culture or the municipality regarding those kind of buildings, what they are seeing, what are their purposes or vision towards those kind of buildings? Yeah, so basically those two main questions.
Thank you, Bushra. So for the first part, yes, but I didn't go very deep into it. I have colleagues of mine who went deep into the neighborhoods, the Sha'biyat, and how they came, but I looked at them in general as urban neighborhoods. So that was what I was focusing on. So in the map of Dubai, I started to identify those neighborhoods because also a lot of them are being either redeveloped or demolished completely, or also the demographics changed. So there's not been as much care given to them, which is very sad because they existed. A lot of memories happened there as well. But I've looked at it and I've identified the areas in Dubai, so I can sit with you later, give you the areas, and what will be very nice is a comparison. And what's very nice about the Shabiyat as well is those that were done for specific groups. So the ones that were done for policemen, the ones that were done for people who worked in the petroleum. So there were ones that were also kind of responding to social key workers at the time. So I think that it's nice to look into that beyond just the urban and architectural design of them. In terms of efforts, right now there's a unified effort across the UAE, led by the Ministry of Culture and Youth, to preserve modern heritage in all emirates and to start nominating buildings and enlisting them so they're preserved and they cannot be damaged or changed without having gone through a whole proposition of why you need to change it. Because sometimes you need to change it because something that a lot of people also misunderstand about these buildings is, yes, it's great to preserve them, but they're also concrete buildings, so they do have a lifespan. So if we are to change, if we are to strengthen, how do we do it? And I think this is important to also look at universal standards that are following that. There are now great efforts. The UNESCO enlisted a lot of Corbusier's buildings on the World Heritage List as well, and they are concrete buildings. So it's nice to look at these methodologies and then implement them. On the local front in Dubai's effort, there is a combined effort from Dubai municipality and Dubai culture as well to nominate and protect these buildings, and it's always easier to do them with assets that we actually already own. So that is an exercise that's already being done. That, for example, as Dubai culture, we own Zabil School for Girls, we own the Union House. So it's very easy to enlist these because they're under our control, but then it becomes a little bit more difficult when it's private ownership. How do you incentivize these people to protect when the land value might be higher than the building value to them in monetary value? But in social, cultural, economic value, it's the opposite. So how do you educate? How do you raise awareness? That becomes an ongoing conversation. And if you find these answers, please share them with me. Thank you.
Maryam, thank you so much for the talk. It was very insightful. I had two quick questions. The first is, have you done a similar study or do you intend to do a similar study about Abu Dhabi? It would be very interesting seeing your perspective on that. The second question is, when you were doing your study, did you come across any political influences on Dubai's architecture? The period you studied is very interesting because it was a period of a lot of political upheaval in the world, the Cold War, a lot of revolutions in developing countries, and in many Middle Eastern countries today or cities, you see the impact of, I guess, Western versus Soviet or socialist style architecture. Did you come across any of that in your research?
Thank you. So to answer your first question, I did look at Abu Dhabi only to look at similar practices by similar architects because John Harris did not only practice in Dubai, he practiced in the Emirates, he practiced in Oman, in Doha, so he has other buildings. But in terms of deep diving into it, no, because there's already a group in Abu Dhabi that is documenting modern heritage here and is doing a great job. So I feel it's my duty to do that for Dubai to complement the things they're doing. But again, I can't look at modern heritage in Dubai as an isolated case. I have to look at what's happened in the region. And I always say late modernism to Dubai because Dubai actually has one of the later examples of modernism. In other areas in the Middle East and even in the GCC and Bahrain, they have buildings that were modernist in style from the 1930s and 1940s. So they are much prior to Dubai's development. So you have to look at that to understand. I can't look at it just as one case. And also some of the typologies, for example, for schools, for clinics, you can see them repeated across the Emirates. It's not only in Dubai. So in those cases, I venture out of Dubai as a case study, but mainly I focus on Dubai. To answer your second question, definitely. So modernism in itself as a movement happened basically interwar, post-war with the Industrial Revolution. So all of these movements, even art movements like the D-style and futurism, everything contributed to this international modernist style to emerge. And for that to be applied to Dubai, it had to respond to other presence as well that was in the region, which for our case in Dubai, there was a heavy British presence. So there was a presence, but I will not say it was political as much as there was a project of modernization, and Dubai was a good city to start that with. So a lot of regional establishments also started from Dubai. So I would say that that happened at the time in the 60s and 70s. But after 71, after the union, there's a continued effort in that. I think I would not say it's so much political as much as it's a one man's vision for Dubai. So when you study modernism in Dubai and you look deeper in the 60s and 70s, I was never alive for Sheikh Rashid's time in Dubai, but I've grown to admire him so much because I think it was his vision that contributed to this more than anything. I remember a story when I did one of my interviews. He wanted to build the Jebel Ali port, and people in Dubai started to actually laugh at him. They said, "You have the Deira port, you have two vessels, boats parked in it, and nobody's coming. Why do you want to build the Jebel Ali port?" And he said, "I'm not building it for me. I'm building it for generations to come. I'm building it for my children's children." And today it's one of the biggest operating ports in the world. So I think it's more of his vision, but it was the British presence, the foreign presence in the city contributed to that. I hope this answers your question.
Hello. I have two questions, if that's okay. My first question, as you said, that modernism is adapted to integrate with local values and social virtues. So, do you think that over time architecture stops adapting to us and we start adapting to architecture, to the new environments of the imagined modernity that we created and we live in? And then my second question is about public squares, and if you think that we've seen the end or the decline of public squares in the UAE or in Dubai, and are public squares, in your opinion, a realistic idea of something that we could have in this new modern UAE or modern Dubai with the urbanization that has happened that kind of pushed them to the side in the process?
Yeah. Um, so they're both great questions, and I don't know if I have an answer for the first one, but I think the more globalized a city becomes, the more globalized the context becomes, there becomes a need for a local response. So you can see it in a lot of people in your generation and a lot of students. I see even with graphic design students, they're going back to Arabic typology for their work. And so there's been also, I think there's always been this struggle to create your own form of a local identity while still kind of adapting to this globalized context. And I think that almost applies to its architecture, but I think that's also, when you start making conscious decisions on design, you start looking at what you want and whether you want to adapt to that architecture or you want the architecture to adapt to your needs. You can create a white cube and a person could be happy in that, but you have another person who will put 5 partitions in it. It depends on your personal needs. So I don't think there's a universal answer for that, but I think in your struggle for this identity in a globalized context, you need to find your own balance, your own local voice, and all of that. For your second question, I think that no city will ever survive without squares, without open squares. You need these breathing pockets in the city for it to function environmentally, socially, communally. These spaces are very important. I don't think that these will disappear, and I do think that they do have a space in Dubai. I do think that people make sure that they happen. People make sure that they stay. I know a lot of people who spend weeks and weeks trying to protect a tree that's about to fall down. So I still have faith in humans. I still have faith in our people. I still have faith that we will make sure that these spaces happen. Whether it's at a vertical level or it's at a horizontal level of the city, it has to happen. Otherwise, the city itself will not survive. That's my opinion. I hope I answered. Yeah.
First, thank you for the amazing presentation. And I have a question regarding the planning in Dubai. while you are discussing your research about the building before, you mentioned that about some urban public space that's now not more appearing there. So we can notice in planning of Dubai, if we study before, we have the Midan, Baraha, As-Saha. But in 2000, it stopped to be um, mentioned in the planning, while in 2015 and now we have the new style of urban public space, such as city walks, Lamer, and this new urban public space that like in each 20 minutes walking you have this public space. If there is any proper plan in Dubai focusing on the urban public spaces to renovate the idea of Al Midan that was before in the Emirati neighborhoods, or it's only by the developers who want to develop some certain type of planning? Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the greatest things that Dubai has done in terms of planning is they always take a step back and look at what worked and what didn't work. And that happened at the master plan level. So even when I showed you, there was a master plan proposed 1959 to 60 that only extended like a network of roads to the city from the old settlement. Then, when oil was discovered, there was a boom in the economy, more projects could happen. A master plan was redeveloped to include zoning, to include more projects. In 1985, there was another version of that master plan that responded to growing needs. The next master plan for Dubai has already been set, it's already been planned, and it's called the 2040 Master Plan of Dubai. And to do that, what the government did is they brought professionals from the public, from the private sector, everyone. And they took feedback from everyone, and there are certain pillars that they have to abide by. So it's no longer a developer's city. You have to abide by these guidelines. So there is a lot of effort to bring back urban centers within neighborhoods, not just for the city, to also have certain areas of Dubai to become completely pedestrianized so that the complete neighborhood can actually be walkable. So there is effort, there is a need for that, but to implement that, you need 10 years, 20 years to implement all of that in a way where the change has an impact, in a way where you can feel it. But the plan is there, and I'm involved in a few of those subcommittees, so I know that the work is happening according to the pillars there. And one of the pillars we have as well is safeguarding our cultural heritage. So whatever we identify as cultural heritage, and I liked that they didn't say traditional, they didn't say modern, they said cultural. Something that we can identify with, something that we have memories with, we have to safeguard it. So that's already a pillar that we have to abide by for the master plan 20 years from now. So I hope that answers.
Are there any other questions? I'll give you a second to think. I was going to ask you one about tourism. So a lot of the Burjil houses and the wind tower houses, and a lot of these are really used for tourism, which is such a huge part of Dubai's economy. Do you see modern heritage also being part of the tourism package as we go through the tourism industry getting bigger and bigger?
Yes, definitely. That's something I really hope we do. And it already started with a few buildings that have been enlisted, a few buildings that are already part of experiences. So in Sharjah, there is Al Qasimiyya School that used to be a public school, and now it's the headquarters for the architecture triennial. So every 3 years, you get a lot of visitors into that space. There is the Bank District in Sharjah, all these modern buildings, they took them, and the Art Binali took over with the Ministry of Graphic Design happening there, which was really nice. So I think, yes, it will definitely contribute to that, and it will also start to bring different crowds that want to see, okay, you have the Wind Towers and you have Burj Khalifa, what do you have in the middle? Oh, do you have a link to that story? And I think there is an educated crowd that wants that is craving that. And sometimes a group of us and our friends, we arrange what we call a modern walk in Dubai. So when the weather is nice, we park 8, 9 in the morning and we walk across all these modern buildings and tell stories from our parents, from our experiences. And I think a lot of people are joining it. I think there is big interest for that.
Yeah, I can see that as well. Yeah. Is there any, I think there's one question. Oh, yes, please.
Hi, Maryam. My name is Rania. First of all, thank you for this talk. I feel like a lot of times when people come from abroad, like one of the main criticisms they have about Dubai is that the city has no soul, that it's too superficial, and your talk like proves that that's very much a wrong opinion and it has so much soul. But I wanted to ask you, what would you say caused the changes that led to this architectural transformation as you describe it? So from modernism to these very tall glass buildings as you describe them, because essentially the vision for Dubai is still the same as it was, to turn it into a global city for everyone to come and for it to be an international hub. So yeah, my question is, why is it that that modernist architecture was abandoned to turn towards these more glassy and big structures today?
Thank you. I think I can give another talk just about this, but I'll answer very briefly. It's the same reason. So when modernist structures were introduced in Dubai, it was because Dubai wanted to become a modern city. It wanted to become an international city. And the kind of architecture you see today is in response to Dubai wanting to be a global city. So it does respond to the needs of the cities, and it responds to the stylistic movements of the time. So at the time, having these whitewashed, modern, clean-cut buildings, that was the epitome of being international. And today, being global is best described by having these skyscrapers, glass, shiny steel buildings. So it is a response to what's happening around you. But I think you need to always, with that, look at what is the local response to that, and you'll always find these examples, because even with the modernist buildings, they're not all great examples of architecture, but they're in between some of those that were very site-specific, that responded to needs, that were sensitive to the end user, so those become successful. And even in today's architecture, I don't say all of it is bad. You'll find things that respond to the climate, that respond very nicely to the sun's direction, that create very nice urban spaces for the community. So you need to filter out the things that work and don't work and create your own understanding of it.
Thank you for your presentation. Can you name a new building in Dubai which would be a good example to respond to not the international influences? It's more local?
That is of today's. I'd say the Index Tower by Norman Foster responds as a skyscraper, is one of the best responding ones to the context in Dubai. It's oriented very nicely to take advantage of the good light and good sunlight. So it allows you to also be more conscious in your carbon footprint and how much AC you use, because the light you get in the house, then the units is very nice. You don't need to use a lot of air conditioning because it's not a box with sun directly projected on it. I think for me, that's one of the better examples of good architecture that responds to context today in the city.
Thanks for the amazing presentation. Actually, I believe modernism, architecture, and urban planning respected everyone in the society, while it's not the case in the contemporary shiny skyscrapers. I believe they overlooked especially the low-income people. So I believe the current squares are luxurious for not for low-income people. So and low-income people currently are enjoying the leftovers of modernism, basically. I believe that. So, how, from your point of view, how do you think we as individuals can highlight and fix this thing? And
I wish I had an answer, but I think that's the thing. It's about how you integrate all the demographics of a city in one space. And the demographics at the time were different than the demographics we have today. So it was much easier to integrate everyone together back then, because everyone witnessing the growth of the city together, these buildings being built. So there was more of an integration of demographics, I believe, at that time. But today, the city is becoming bigger. We have a lot of what we call also people who are just passing by Dubai and leaving. You have a lot of demographics also that don't spend more than 1 to 2 years in Dubai and leave. So how do you cater to all of this is a question. How do you create a space that caters to all of them? And unfortunately, there's always been this kind of idea that they're enjoying the leftover spaces, but why should it be a leftover space? Why not? This is the idea that I feel like if you bring life back into these spaces, everyone will enjoy them. So what we've done is with one of the historic districts in Dubai, it was not used for a lot of years, but now we've rehabilitated it, opened it as a very big, large offering, a heritage museum, a Shandaga museum. And it's very nice. If you go at night, you kind of see almost the entire demographics of Dubai there, like all the different demographics. You see workers, you see people going to the museum, you see tourists, you see locals having dinner. So I think it's successful when you create a space that shouldn't be left over. I think the ones that are successful are those in-between spaces where you don't know, is it private, is it public, is it for everyone, is it not for everyone? Let me sit and see, will someone tell me to leave or not? Those are the interesting spaces, but the leftover ones, I think that's where, again, the people feel the architecture, not the other way around. I hope I answered.
Are there any other questions? I think the people failed the architecture, not the other way around, is a good place to end on. So thank you very much for that very interesting talk. And I know there's other people that want to talk to you in more detail outside. Thank you all for attending. There is a reception outside that you may all enjoy.